I'm JohnBerry555, and today I'm continuing my series of MASH retro reviews with Season 5, Episode 14, Hawk's Nightmare. So in this episode, Hawkeye is, he's having a bunch of nightmares and he is sleepwalking, so Colonel Potter puts in the call to Sidney Freeman. Essentially, the point of the episode is that Hawkeye is basically, frustrated with the war, and his jokes are not quite cutting it as a defensive measure anymore. Rader's actually the one who picked up on that. He talks about Colonel Potter and his painting, him and his animals, as how they're dealing with the war, trying not to dwell too much on it. Hawkeye does it with humor. But it's failing. The war is winning. But another big thing that what's going on with Hawk's sleepwalking nightmares is it's transporting him back to his childhood, to Crabapple Cove, when things were simpler. And of course, the war invades those sleepwalks and dreams, because his friends start getting injured. And Sidney Freeman actually gets Hawkeye to express that himself, rather than just, tell him what it means. And Hawkeye does start worrying that he's going crazy, that he recognizes that he's afraid to fall asleep because of his sleepwalking and his nightmares. So the fact that he's recognizing this stuff means he's not entirely crazy. But the thing is that he does get to a better position, but the episode does not portray like he's cured. Like, he'll still have nightmares, he may still sleepwalk, his dreams will still try to bring him back to Crabapple Cove, to a time when it's simpler, when there's no war, no violence, no responsibility. But just gotta work on through it. It's gonna be only fully over once the war ends, though PTSD is a thing. But when you think about it, there's 2 more episodes in the future of MASH that deal with Hawkeye having mental health issues. One is more unresolved childhood trauma, which obviously they didn't think of that when they wrote this episode, but it does put another light on this episode that trauma had not infiltrated his dreams as well. It was just the war. But we also know what happens in Goodbye, Farrell, Amen. So it is kind of interesting that the character that they decided to put the most psychological baggage from the war on is Hawkeye. Just something interesting I have observed. But probably one of the best things that Sidney does, besides just talking Hawkeye through his dreams, through his fears, and by talking through, asking Hawkeye the appropriate questions to get him to come to the conclusions himself. So prompting. And Hawkeye's smart enough to, I think, understand what is going on, but he does very much appreciate that. But the thing is, after all that, Sidney gets Hawkeye to engage in an imaginary game of basketball. So I wouldn't call it feeding the dreams of sleepwalking, more of giving Hawkeye a chance in the waking world while awake to just relax, to forget about the war for just a little bit. And of course, Klingo sees this and says, "No wonder I can't get out by being crazy. There's a whole line." And which I really do love that line from Klingo. There adds a nice little bit of comedy to the episode that's mostly a serious episode. Honestly, most of the comedy comes from the other characters. There's a little bit of comedy when Hawkeye wakes up Frank, because he's afraid to go to sleep, and Frank is not helpful, obviously. That little bit of comedy is there, but it feels more at the expense of Frank, like normal. But most of it is just, Klingo observing and making remarks, and some Radar observing and making some remarks that just are on the comedic side. Mostly it was, Klingo remarking that, "No wonder I can't get out of the army. Everyone else is crazy and I'm in the line." And of course, the ending bit of the episode too is Hawkeye and Klingo. Klingo thinking Hawkeye is putting on an act and all that, and being jealous that he didn't think of himself. So a little bit of comedy there, because we know that Hawkeye's nightmares, his sleepwalking, are real. And of course, Hawkeye just, plays along and all that. Mo just, engage in the humor of it, because that has always been his coping mechanism, engaging in that humor. So he sticks with it in that ending scene, just joking along, even though Klinger is acting like it's a real bit. Does that make sense? But yeah, overall, this is a good episode. I don't know if I would call it fun, because obviously sleepwalking and nightmares driven by the holes of wall, or more likely no longer be able, your normal coping mechanism no longer working, and now you're sleepwalking, having nightmares. That stuff isn't fun, but it is a good episode. And that's what I really do like. It is a good episode. It is, I would say, thought-provoking. MASH, I think, is one of the few shows, especially in the 70s and 80s, that dealt with the reality, the horrors of war and the psychological impact. Like, there's some other military comedies out there that totally deal with this kind of topic differently. Hogan's Heroes never touches on anything like this, to my knowledge. Paranoia, yeah, but for a totally different reason. McHale's Navy, well, they always are trying to make Captain, or wherever his Billington, trying to make that character think he's insane, and whenever he is, that's always portrayed as a joke. Honestly, I don't know about Gomer Power USMC, how they did in there. There's, I think Sergeant Bilko was another show that I didn't really watch, so I don't know for sure. But again, from what I'm saying, that's supposed to be a comedy, pure and simple. And there's a lot of, old classic TV shows that are set, during war, during the military time, but psychological impact of war is not treated seriously. It is treated as a joke, if it's even included, and oftentimes it doesn't seem to be. While MASH, especially like with this episode and later episodes, and earlier episodes as well, treats the psychological impact of war seriously, and often the humor, when it's connected with that, is a character trying to deal with the said psychological impact of being at war, rather than the psychological impact being the humor. So I think there was a little bit of that in some of the early episodes, if I remember correctly, but mostly it treats that impact itself seriously. But the humor often comes from characters trying to deal with it, which is a very interesting way of doing it, and a very good way of still having that military humor, that war setting humor, in a much more respectful way than other shows have done, when they've even tried to portray the psychological impact. But that's what I got to say. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my latest retro review. I do hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please be sure to give this video a like. Also, consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't done so already, and I hope to see you for my very next video.